What if a simple compliment on live TV could shake the White House, spark a global media storm, and push the First Lady of the United States into the international spotlight? When Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré praised Melania Trump in an interview, no one expected what came next. Trump erupted. The world watched. And Melania? She made a move no one saw coming. This isn't just a political story. It's a clash of power, respect, and diplomacy that changed everything. It was a quiet May evening in 2025 when Ibrahim Traoré, the charismatic 36-year-old president of Burkina Faso, sat down for what was expected to be a routine interview with CNN International. The location was his presidential palace in Ouagadougou, with traditional African art decorating the walls behind him. The interviewer, veteran journalist Anderson Cooper, had flown in exclusively for this conversation, intending to focus on African leadership and international relations. Neither man could have predicted that a seemingly harmless question would trigger one of the most explosive diplomatic controversies in recent memory. As the cameras rolled, Anderson adjusted his notes. "You've been praised for your progressive policies and youthful leadership. Many compare your approach to that of younger American leaders," he began. "What do you think about the role of First Ladies in modern politics?" Ibrahim smiled, sitting tall with the composure of someone trained in military discipline. "Anderson," he said calmly, "I believe strong women behind strong leaders are essential. Take Mrs. Melania Trump, for example. She's an intelligent, multilingual woman who could contribute much more to American politics if she were given the platform." At that very moment in Washington, President Donald Trump was in the Oval Office reviewing documents when one of his aides rushed in. "Sir, you need to see this. The President of Burkina Faso is talking about the First Lady live on CNN." Trump looked up, mildly curious, but his curiosity quickly turned to alarm as he switched on the TV. Back in the CNN interview, Traoré leaned forward, his voice gaining conviction. "You know, Anderson, I've studied many political partnerships globally. Mrs. Trump has been underutilized by the American political system. In Africa, we understand that behind every great leader is an equally great partner." Anderson Cooper, recognizing that the interview was heading into unprecedented territory, asked, "What specifically do you admire about the First Lady?" Traoré's eyes lit up. "Melania Trump speaks 5 languages fluently: English, French, German, Italian, and Slovene. She's traveled extensively, understands international cultures, and has a sophisticated grasp of global affairs. In my opinion, she could be an excellent ambassador for American values abroad." He paused, then added thoughtfully, "If I may be frank, President Trump would benefit from relying more on his wife's counsel, particularly in matters of international diplomacy. Her European background could help bridge the cultural gaps America is struggling with right now." As the words broadcasted around the world, Trump's face grew redder by the second. Watching live from the White House, he turned to his chief of staff and muttered, "What the hell is this guy doing?" "He's praising her, sir," the aide replied hesitantly. "I don't care what he's doing," Trump snapped, standing up. "No foreign leader gets to tell me how to use my wife in politics." Meanwhile, in the East Wing, Melania Trump had just been informed by her secretary about the unfolding interview. Curious, she turned on the television, catching Traoré mid-sentence. As she listened, something inside her shifted. It wasn't often that anyone, let alone a world leader, acknowledged her intellect and potential. Back in Ouagadougou, Anderson Cooper leaned in. "President Traoré, you're essentially suggesting that First Lady Trump could play a more prominent role in American diplomacy." "Absolutely," Ibrahim said without hesitation. "In African cultures, we don't separate the wisdom of a leader from that of their partner. Mrs. Trump's life experience gives her unique insights. These are the kinds of qualities America needs if it wants to rebuild trust internationally." He glanced at the camera without realizing he was speaking directly to millions of American viewers. "I'd welcome a chance to work with Mrs. Trump on African development. Her international perspective could bring fresh energy to US-Africa relations." Although his tone was diplomatic and respectful, The message carried an implicit critique that Trump was failing to recognize and utilize one of his administration's most valuable assets. In the Oval Office, Secret Service agents outside could hear the president's raised voice booming through the walls. "Get me the State Department on the line now," Trump shouted, pacing behind his desk. "This guy thinks he can tell me how to run my marriage. Who the hell does he think he is?" Melania quietly entered the room, her presence calm but determined. "Donald, I think you should—" "Not now, Melania," Trump barked, barely acknowledging her. That dismissive wave-off was exactly the sort of behavior Traoré had diplomatically criticized, and Melania noticed it. She sat across from her husband, her expression unreadable. Just then, Trump's communications director entered in a rush. "Mr. President, CNN is requesting a formal response. Social media is exploding." Trump pointed at the TV, his voice rising. "Untapped potential? This guy is basically saying I don't know how to use my wife. Who gave him the right to analyze my marriage on global television?" Across America, viewers were glued to their screens as presiders, and Trump paced furiously in the Oval Office. "Get the African ambassadors in here," he growled. "I want to know why some 30-something soldier from a country most Americans can't even pronounce thinks he can give me marriage advice." Melania stood up slowly, her eyes calm. "Donald, perhaps you should actually listen to what he said." "I heard what he said," Trump exploded, waving his arms. "He said you should be doing foreign policy. He said I'm not using you right. The audacity of this guy." Ironically, in that very moment, Trump was proving Ibrahim's point, that he rarely listened to his wife's opinions when it came to serious matters. His chief of staff tried to step in. "Sir, maybe we should craft a measured response." "Measured?" Trump shouted. "I'll show him measured." He stormed to his desk and grabbed the phone. "Get me the emergency broadcast system. I'm going live in 10 minutes. The White House staff exchanged anxious glances. Trump rarely went live during moments of calm. When he did it in anger, it almost always spelled disaster. Within minutes, phones buzzed across America. News tickers flashed. Breaking. President Trump to address the nation following controversial comments from Burkina Faso's leader. In Ouagadougou, President Traoré had just finished the interview and was returning to his private quarters when his communications director rushed in. "Mr. President, you need to see this. President Trump is about to make an emergency address about your comments regarding the First Lady." Ibrahim blinked, surprised. "An emergency broadcast? Over that?" He replayed the conversation in his mind. He had been respectful, complimentary even. "I praised her intelligence. I simply said she could play a diplomatic role. How is that offensive?" Meanwhile, US newsrooms were in chaos. CNN's Wolf Blitzer was already preparing for round-the-clock cover. "This is historic," he said. "A US president calling a national emergency broadcast over a comment about the First Lady. Unprecedented." Over at Fox News, Tucker Carlson had already framed the story. "This is exactly the sort of disrespect African leaders are showing toward American power. Ibrahim Traoré is out of line." But on social media, a very different narrative was forming. Hashtags like #Traoré was right and #defend Melania began trending. Many Americans had seen the interview and found Ibrahim's remarks thoughtful, perhaps even accurate. In the East Wing, Melania Trump was receiving urgent calls. Her press secretary approached cautiously. "Ma'am, the president would like you to release a statement supporting his position." Melania looked at the TV, then back at her team. She didn't answer immediately. Over the years, she had learned to stay above the fray. But this time was different. Someone had finally recognized her talents, something she rarely heard within the walls of the West Wing. At 8:47 p.m. Eastern Time, President Trump appeared live on every major U.S. television network. The Oval Office was his stage. His face was flushed with anger, his tone tight with restrained fury. "My fellow Americans," he began, "tonight I address you about a completely unacceptable situation that demands an immediate response. The president of Burkina Faso, a country that receives generous American aid, has publicly insulted the dignity of this administration by commenting on my wife in a manner completely beyond diplomatic norms. He pointed at the camera. Let me be clear. No foreign leader tells the President of the United States how to engage with the First Lady. Ibrahim Traoré thinks he can psychoanalyze my marriage on global television, suggest that Melania should be doing foreign policy, and imply I don't know how to run my own administration. This is a gross violation of protocol. Trump's voice grew louder. Melania Trump is the First Lady of the United States, not a diplomatic ornise, meant for African leaders to project their fantasies onto. This young man has crossed a line. In living rooms across the country, viewers sat in stunned silence. Even seasoned journalists struggled to process what they were watching. Trump continued, his voice booming. I've been president for over 4 years. I know exactly how to utilize every member of my administration, including my wife. I don't need advice from someone who took power in a military coup. That last claim was false. Ibrahim Traoré had been democratically elected after a transitional government, but Trump wasn't interested in facts. He was venting rage. Effective immediately, we are reviewing all aid to Burkina Faso, Trump said. Respect must go both ways. When they learn how to show it, then we can talk. The broadcast ended abruptly. News anchors scrambled to provide context. Across Africa and Europe, emergency meetings were held to respond to the diplomatic firestorm. French President Emmanuel Macron called for calm. President Trump's reaction was disproportionate, he said. President Traoré's comments were respectful and well within the norms of international dialogue. In London, Prime Minister Keir Starmer issued a statement emphasizing that no nation, regardless of size, should be disrespected on the world stage. But the most powerful response came from the African Union. Within hours, the AU released a unified statement. President Traoré's remarks were measured, diplomatic, and appreciative of American values. The US President's response reflects an unfortunate departure from respectful engagement. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim was in an emergency cabinet session when his foreign minister entered with an update. Mr. President, we're receiving support from over 20 African nations, several European countries, and even some American civil rights organizations. Ibrahim sat quietly for a moment. I stand by my words, he said. I respected Mrs. Trump and highlighted her potential. If that threatens President Trump, it says more about his insecurities than my diplomacy. And his wife, Ajara, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Maybe this isn't just about diplomacy. Maybe it's about how the world sees women in leadership. Deji. As the world processed the diplomatic chaos, social media platforms continued to erupt. Hashtags like #TrumpMeltdown and #Ibrahim was right trended globally. Political commentators, celebrities, and citizens joined the debate. While some defended Trump's outrage, many more praised Ibrahim's thoughtful words and questioned why a compliment had caused such an explosive response. In the East Wing of the White House, Melania Trump was silent, watching the growing firestorm unfold in real time. Her advisors approached hesitantly. Ma'am, the President insists you issue a formal statement backing his response. Melania remained still, staring at the TV. The words of President Traoré echoed in her mind, not just the praise, but the recognition. For years, she had been dismissed or used symbolically, often seen, but rarely heard. But in that interview, someone had spoken to her abilities, her background, and her value, not as a wife, but as a partner in diplomacy. At 10:30 p.m., just 2 hours after Trump's emergency broadcast, the world was stunned again. The First Lady's office released a public statement, unprecedented in tone and timing. I have reviewed President Traoré's comments in their entirety, the statement read. His words were respectful, insightful, and deeply appreciative of my background and capabilities. I am honored by his recognition of my multilingual abilities and global perspective. Melania continued, as someone who chose to become an American citizen, who has lived in multiple countries, I understand the importance of building bridges between cultures. President Traoré's acknowledgement of this value was not inappropriate. It was diplomatically astute and culturally aware. The impact was immediate. Cable news networks halted regular programming to report on the story. Anderson Cooper, still in Burkina Faso, looked visibly astonished as he read Melania's full statement live on air. "This is extraordinary," he said. "The First Lady of the United States has just directly contradicted her husband's emergency broadcast. We've never seen anything like this before." In the Oval Office, Trump was pacing again, red-faced and fuming. His press secretary entered hesitantly, holding a printed copy of Melania's statement. "She did what?" Trump shouted, grabbing the paper. "She's supporting the African president, sir. Publicly." Trump's hands trembled as he read. "She's siding with him over me." His chief of staff tried to reason with him. "Sir, maybe she's just trying to ease the tension. Her tone is diplomatic." Trump wasn't listening. "This is a betrayal. My own wife. Does she even understand what this looks like?" In Ouagadougou, President Traoré was getting ready for bed when his communications director entered, out of breath. "Mr. President, you should see this. The First Lady of the United States has issued a statement supporting your interview." Ibrahim sat down, reading carefully. A smile formed on his face. "She has more courage than her husband gives her credit for," he said quietly. "This confirms everything I said. She is capable, intelligent, and diplomatic." The global media went into overdrive. CNN hosted a live panel with diplomats and former White House staffers. One former ambassador said, "This isn't just a First Lady speaking her mind. This is a crack in the presidential facade. For the first time, Melania Trump is stepping forward independently." Meanwhile, conservative commentators scrambled to contain the narrative. On Fox News, the story was framed as a miscommunication between the first family. But few were buying it. By morning, the White House was in full crisis mode. For the first time in modern history, a sitting U.S. president and his First Lady were on opposite sides of an international diplomatic incident. At 6:00 a.m., Trump demanded to see Melania in their private residence. What unfolded was a heated, emotional confrontation that staff could hear echoing through the halls. "How could you undermine me like this?" Trump's voice boomed. "The whole world is watching, and you choose to support some African politician instead of your own husband." Melania's reply was calm but resolute. "I won't apologize for acknowledging respectful words about my experience and intelligence. Ibrahim Traoré showed me more professional respect in 10 minutes than your administration has in 4 years." Trump was speechless for a moment. "You want to talk about loyalty?" Melania continued. "Where was your loyalty when you laughed off my initiatives or dismissed my work as meaningless? I'm not here to be a silent ornament. I'm capable. And for once, someone said so publicly." Trump's fury was now mixed with disbelief. He stormed out of the room, leaving behind a stunned silence. That morning, both CNN and Fox News reported on the confrontation, citing inside sources from within the White House. The American public was now fully aware that the First Family was experiencing a very public fracture. Back in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré conducted his usual morning briefing, avoiding any personal remarks. When international reporters pushed for a reaction to the First Lady's statement and the rumored conflict in the White House, he responded with poise. "I will not comment on the private matters of any family," he said. "However, I stand by what I said. Mrs. Trump's statement proves my point. She is a thoughtful, intelligent woman who deserves to be taken seriously on the world stage." In Europe, world leaders were becoming increasingly concerned. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz called French President Macron. "This is no longer just a diplomatic spat," Scholz observed. "This is undermining the image of American leadership itself." Macron agreed. "We may be witnessing the moment Melania Trump steps out of her husband's shadow, politically and diplomatically." The story had now moved beyond protocol and politics. It had become a powerful conversation about identity, respect, and the roles of women in global leadership. 3 days after the CNN interview that shook the political world, the chaos reached an unexpected resolution. In a stunning move, Melania Trump accepted an invitation to speak at the United Nations on the topic of women's roles in international diplomacy. The announcement sent shockwaves through Washington. For the first time in her public life, Melania was stepping into the spotlight not as a symbolic figure, but as an independent voice in global affairs. She wasn't there to smile or pose. She was there to speak. Her UN speech was graceful, articulate, and quietly powerful. She acknowledged the controversy without naming names, choosing instead to focus on the larger issue. In every corner of the world, she said, there are women with voices, intelligent, informed, and globally aware, who are overlooked in policy conversations. Recognizing these voices isn't weakness, it's diplomacy. She continued, when leaders from any nation, regardless of size or geography, acknowledge the potential of women in leadership, they strengthen, not threaten, the international community. World leaders applauded. Delegates from both developing nations and global powers stood in respect. Her message had landed. Back in Washington, President Trump had no choice but to respond. Cornered by the attention Melania was receiving and the optics of her international praise, he reluctantly called a press conference. The First Lady has always been a tremendous asset to American diplomacy, he said stiffly, reading from a script. I'm proud of her work on the global stage. But behind the scenes, things were different. Their relationship had shifted in a way that could not be undone. Melania had tasted recognition for her intellect and experience, and she wasn't going to retreat into the background again. She began receiving invitations from universities, diplomatic forums, and international NGOs. Her calendar filled with events not curated by the White House, but by global institutions that saw her value. She launched initiatives focused on women's education, cross-cultural diplomacy, and humanitarian partnerships. She built a team, her own team. The First Lady was no longer an accessory. She was a diplomatic actor in her own right. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré continued his presidency with quiet confidence. He had not set out to spark a global moment, but he had. His respectful recognition of Melania Trump's potential had triggered a re-evaluation of how women in power are perceived, not just in America, but around the world. His actions had reminded people that leadership isn't always about titles or bluster. Sometimes, leadership is about seeing value where others don't. 6 months later, Melania Trump visited Africa as part of her expanded diplomatic role. Her first stop, Burkina Faso. When she arrived in Ouagadougou, she was greeted with dignity and celebration. She and Ibrahim Traoré met privately, then appeared together at a press conference focused on women's education and empowerment initiatives across the continent. Reporters noted the professionalism and mutual respect between the two. There was no tension, just two leaders with different backgrounds, united by a shared goal. This partnership is not about politics, Melania said during her remarks. It's about listening to each other, learning from each other, and recognizing that global progress requires global respect. Back at the White House, President Trump watched the broadcast silently. He didn't comment, didn't tweet, didn't rage. For once, he was quiet. Perhaps he usatum serehit, understood deep down that this was a turning point he could no longer control. The spotlight had shifted. What began as a simple interview, a minor question about the role of First Ladies, had turned into a powerful international movement, not because of drama, not because of conflict, but because of one thing: respect. President Ibrahim Traoré's thoughtful comments had done what years of public relations couldn't. He had elevated Melania Trump's voice, not by giving her power, but by recognizing the power she already had. And in doing so, he revealed something deeper: that diplomacy isn't just about treaties or armies. Sometimes, it's about who we choose to listen to. In the end, it wasn't anger, threats, or emergency broadcasts that shaped the outcome. It was a calm, respectful conversation, a recognition that intelligence, dignity, and cultural wisdom have no borders. As history would later record, that calm voice from Ouagadougou created a ripple that changed international diplomacy forever. Not with accusations or insults, but with insight and grace. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is speak the truth, gently but firmly, and let the world respond.